So earlier this week, the Super Mario Bros. Movie released in theaters, and before I talk more about the film, I want to mention three things. 1, this film is the best movie I've seen in 5 years. 2, the reviews for this film are living proof that movie critics are out of touch. And 3, I just got back from vacation, so if it seems like I'm all over the place, that's because I wanted to rush back and talk about this. So this Wednesday when I was in Florida, I went to see this movie, and I honestly didn't expect it to be as good as it is. I mean, this movie is the definition of fan service. It knows its audience and it knows it well. So I guess I first want to talk about some surface level things that I thought were great, and I also want to talk about the critic reviews for this film because they are extremely concerning. Like, I know the critics are looking at films from a different perspective than the casual audience, but I think these reviews they just don't really understand why this movie was even made in the first place and who it was made for, but we'll talk more about that later. But let's start with some surface level things. I'm gonna keep the spoilers subtle in this segment. The thing I personally loved most about this film was all of the little references and Easter eggs thrown in. It just makes the film feel even more like fan service. There's just so many cool Easter eggs, like Mario's ringtone being the GameCube theme. There's also a scene where Mario is playing Kid Icarus on his NES. There is just so many of these moments in this movie, and it was just an absolute love letter to me and everyone else that grew up playing this franchise. And not only the Mario franchise, I mean, it appealed to every Nintendo fan because it was stuff outside of just the Mario franchise, like Kid Icarus, like I mentioned. Also, another thing I thought was done perfectly in this movie was the chemistry between Mario and Luigi. In some Mario games and Mario spin-offs, Mario it feels like he treats Luigi like crap sometimes, but in this movie, luckily, there was none of that at all. I watched the whole thing and I can't remember a single time Mario and Luigi had an argument, let alone a disagreement. You might view that as shallow or unrealistic, but I mean, this is a story about video game characters. Luigi is done really well in this movie because he's still fearful and somewhat cowardly. He has full trust in his brother. Even if he is afraid to do something, he'll still stick by his brother's side, and that is exactly how Luigi should be portrayed. And speaking of Mario and Luigi, you might be worried about the voice acting. When it was revealed that Chris Pratt was playing Mario instead of Charles Martinet, most people thought that was a really strange decision, including me. But now that I watched this movie, I have to say that Chris Pratt did an amazing job at playing Mario. I forgot it was him 10 minutes into the film. It's still weird that they didn't choose Charles Martinet for this film, but regardless, Chris Pratt was amazing in this movie, and that goes for pretty much every voice actor. I really doubted Chris Pratt's ability to create a convincing Mario voice, and he proved me wrong, so hats off to him. That was a stupid joke. That was a really stupid joke. So now I want to talk about why I think the critic reviews are so bad for this film on both Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. I think the first mistake critics made was watch the movie as someone who doesn't play Mario games. You know, I have no way of knowing whether or not a certain critic has played these games, but I have a feeling a lot of them just watch the movie because it's their job. Maybe this sounds like incoherent gibberish to you, but hear me out. This film was made for a certain audience, and that certain audience is people who are fans of the Mario games. If you are not a fan of the Super Mario Bros. Games, you will most likely not care for this movie, and that's just a fact. This movie was made for the fans, which is why the audience score has 2 times the amount of the critic score. But maybe this isn't fair, so let's give the critics a chance and hear them out. So let's take a look at the Super Mario Bros. Movie on Rotten Tomatoes, and as you can see, the critic score has It was hovering around the 47 range, and it has gone up to 54%, but look at that audience score. If that doesn't tell the whole story, then I don't know what does. But yeah, you don't find a split like this. You don't find that very often. The film is plastered with references, Easter eggs, and just about everything you can imagine from the game, which is what makes the film so good. This guy's saying this, but he gave it a 2.5 out of 5. So much so that the story is bare bones as Mario simply jumps from one colorful screen to the next without a care in the world. This is a Mario movie. Alright, raise your hand if you've ever played a Mario game for the story. Notice how you didn't raise your hand? That's because this is not what this franchise is supposed to be. It's supposed to be about platforming, it's supposed to be about power-ups, action. It's an action genre, it's a platformer. And that is exactly what this movie had. It had references, it had good action scenes, it had just comedy at its finest. It was just great all around. It doesn't need a It doesn't need a tedious storyline. It doesn't need any of that. It was perfect the way it was. And I'm going to take a step back and say that this movie isn't perfect. I mean, obviously, that goes without saying, but I thought I might as well mention it, because no, I don't think this movie is perfect. There are definitely a few flaws and mistakes that you could point to, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But to me, it just seems like critics are complaining about a film that really doesn't deserve the criticism. Does the film deserve to be worshipped on an altar? No, but it does everything it set out to do correctly. Like I said earlier, this movie was for the fans, not the critics, and maybe that's why the critics didn't like it very much. So now, I do want to talk about a few things I didn't like about the movie, and there will be spoilers in this segment. First off, the biggest flaw I have with the movie is that for some reason there's a few instances throughout the film where 80s rock is randomly included. It feels so out of place because for most of the film, you're listening to remixed Mario soundtrack from the games, so it's just a really weird and awkward inclusion to throw 80s rock into the mix. Also off topic, but I know the songs are good, but wow, are they overused. Like, they don't have to be in every single movie, guys. Just stick with the Mario remixes, please. Another thing to point to is that Luigi doesn't really get much action in this movie. He gets captured pretty much right when he enters the Mushroom Kingdom, and the rest of the plot consists of Mario, Peach, and Toad going to save him in the kingdom. The only real action we see Luigi in is the final battle, but other than that, I'm not saying that the plot itself is a flaw, I'm just saying that I wish there was more Luigi in this film. I was also just really surprised and disappointed to not see Yoshi at all in this film. Technically, you can see Mario, Peach, and Toad travel through Yoshi's Island, and you can see a Yoshi pack in the background, but other than that, Yoshi isn't even mentioned. There is a Yoshi coin from Super Mario World in one of the backgrounds of one of the scenes, but I guess that counts. Other than that, there really isn't much to say. If you're a fan of the Mario franchise, this movie is a must watch. Like I said in the beginning, this movie knows its audience and it knows it well. It's a love letter to fans, and I think it might be one of my favorite movies of all time. The animation is great, the voice acting is fantastic. They really didn't make a whole lot of mistakes with this film. But that's it for me. Go get tickets to the movie. That's it for today's video, and hopefully I see you all again soon.